All right, fam. Welcome to another episode of the Breaking Conservatarian broadcast with your favorite conservatarian, Jeff Charles. I don't have a guest today, but I thought I'd at least take some time and discuss this whole basically everything that's going on with the election right now. I mean, you've got the issues with voter fraud and alleged cheating and the media declaring Biden the winner and all that stuff. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that. But before I go forward, please subscribe, share, like this video, and let's get into it. So let's start with the election itself. If you saw me in my appearance on the Hotep's election coverage, you heard me basically predict exactly what's happening right now. About a month or two before Election Day, it basically became obvious to me that this election was always going to be contested. I knew that there was no way that either side was going to win in a landslide. And people on both sides called me crazy. I mean, I went on Fox Soul and they said it was just wishful thinking. They said it was going to be a landslide for Biden. And people on the right were telling me, nope, it's going to be MAGA all the way, MAGA landslide 2020. And as usual, both sides were wrong and I was right. So I'm going to gloat a little bit. But realistically, anybody should have been able to see this coming, right? I mean, you saw the polling, and I know that people only believe the polls when it says what they want them to say. And this happens on both sides, but I notice it more on the right just because that's the world that I'm in. But even though I didn't think that the polls were 100% accurate, I mean, there were plenty of polls that were just wacky. There were polls that showed Biden ahead by 12 points. And when even the Biden campaign came out and said that those polls weren't accurate, people should have known. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that they weren't directionally accurate. Like you hear Scott Adams say, the polls were directionally accurate. In a lot of those states, Biden was ahead, but only by a little bit. And I think Trump started to catch up by the time Election Day came. If you look at the polls that were taken, so let's say the day before and the morning of Election Day, it was a lot tighter in those battleground states where it really matters. Now, national polling, obviously Biden had a lead, which meant that he was likely going to get the popular vote. And I think a lot of people on the right were thinking that it would be a repeat of 2016. And I even asked, could this be another 2016 where Trump doesn't get the popular vote, but he wins the electoral votes? But what we need to remember is that when a president wins election without the popular vote, it's a fluke. It's not a common thing. The last president to actually have that happen, I believe it was George W. Bush. Before him, and I can't remember who it was, but it was back in the 1800s. So this doesn't happen very often, right? So the national polling kind of had me a little bit concerned. I was like, I mean, it could happen like 2016, but something tells me that 2020 is different. But either way, I knew that the election was going to be so close that it was going to be contested by either side. If the shoe were on the other foot and Trump had won these states by as little of a margin that Biden did, then Biden's team would have been contesting the results of the election. And both campaigns knew that this was going to happen. And I wrote an article about this. Both sides were already gearing up for a legal battle weeks before Election Day. They had already started raising funds for their legal teams. And it was, to me, it just seemed inevitable. And I even predicted that this is going to go on for weeks, and I still stand by that. This could go on even until December. Now, the presidential election will be decided in December, and maybe at the very end of December, but it's probably going to be, if it does go into December, I'm thinking maybe early to mid-December when it'll be settled. I don't see the legal battles taking that long unless there's a lot of evidence that the Trump campaign brings to the table that needs to be litigated. But let's get into the question that everybody wants to know about, right? Voter fraud. Was there voter fraud? Did Biden steal the election? Or did the Democrats steal the election for Joe Biden? Were there people in these battleground states like Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, were there people cheating? That's what a lot of the litigation that is being filed by the Trump campaign is alleging. There are a lot of allegations of voter fraud. I have written about some of them. In Pennsylvania, a mail carrier claims he filed an affidavit, which by the way, is under oath. So when you file an affidavit, you're swearing under penalty of perjury, which means they're going to lock your ass up if they find out that you're lying. And this mail carrier, his name is Richard Hopkins. And he's a whistleblower, so he gets those protections, but he sent an affidavit to Senator Lindsey Graham, who is the chair of the Senate Judiciary, and it alleged that his instructors or his supervisors instructed him to collect ballots that were sent after the election day. Now, the rules are supposed to be that the ballots had to be received by 8:00 p.m. on election day for them to be counted. And they could be counted up to 3 days after election day, but it had to be in on the 3rd by 8:00. But this mail carrier says that he was ordered to collect ballots that were sent after that date and provide those for his supervisor so that they could backdate them. Now, if that's true, then laws were being broken. That is potential voter fraud. Now, here's the thing. We don't know if those ballots went for Trump or for Biden, but we know how these numbers kind of break down. More people on the left used mail-in ballots rather than showing up in person to vote, and more people who supported Trump showed up to vote rather than using mail-in ballots. So it's pretty reasonable to assume that most of these ballots were going to be cast for Biden. Now, Hopkins doesn't tell us how many ballots he handled and how many he collected. But you can imagine if he was ordered to do this, he probably wasn't the only one. There was another story out of Detroit. I wrote about that earlier today. She was an election worker, and she says that she witnessed other election workers who were Democrats coaching voters on how they should vote, on how to vote Democrat. And I think in some cases, she even said that some even went to the booth with them to help them vote for down the ballot for Democrats. And she also made similar allegations of them backdating ballots that weren't supposed to be counted. So again, she also swore this under oath. And according to Ronna McDaniel, who is the chair of the Republican National Committee, they have about 131 affidavits making allegations of various types of voter fraud. And they also claim to have over 2,000, or actually 2,800 incident reports to the same effect. Now, I don't know if those are submitted under penalty of perjury, but it's still compelling. Now, I know that in Nevada, the GOP submitted about 3,000 cases of voter fraud that they allege are voter fraud to Attorney General William Barr. But these are mainly situations where people are voting in Nevada when they're not in the state. But there could be other explanations for that. Maybe they just moved out because of COVID-19. Maybe they went to stay with family, or maybe they just moved away temporarily, but were always planning to come back, so they consider themselves to be residents of the state. But even if they were all fraud, that's only 3,000. And that's kind of where I'm getting to my point here. Do I believe that there's cheating and voter fraud going on? Yes, that is indisputable. Anybody who tells you that there's absolutely no voter fraud and absolutely no cheating going on at these polls is lying to you, or they're lying to themselves because they're believing something that they want to believe. Now, the corporate media is trying to cover this up, and it's very apparent in the way that they cover this. They won't even acknowledge the possibility that there is voter fraud. But I'm sorry, there is absolutely no way that you're going to convince me that all 131 people who submitted affidavits under penalty of perjury were lying. You're not going to convince me that every single one of those people was willing to go to jail if they got found out just because they wanted to say that there was voter fraud. There is no way you're going to convince me that all 2,000 or 2,800 of those people in Michigan who filed incident reports, you're not going to convince me that every single one of them is lying. Are some of them? Probably. And others just may be mistaken, or maybe others just maybe saw something that they thought was shady and decided to report it just in case, and maybe they'll find out, oh, well, there's another explanation for that. I mean, because we've also seen other allegations that ended up getting debunked or explained away, like the allegation that they found 130,000 votes that all went for Biden overnight, I believe in Wisconsin or one of the other states. Turns out that that wasn't true, that didn't actually happen. Then there's the issues of the Sharpies in Arizona. That kind of fell apart, although I do believe that there may have been some incompetence there. And there's been a lot of other allegations that have been shot down. I believe a lot of the lawsuits that the Trump campaign filed were also shot down. And then there are others that are still pending. They just submitted another one. They just filed another one yesterday in Pennsylvania. So the Trump team is fighting this hard, but there is voter fraud going on. Again, there's absolutely no way to dispute that. However, I have not seen compelling evidence that there has been enough voter fraud to have swung the election to Joe Biden. And to put it another way, I haven't seen evidence that Biden would not win this election unless there was voter fraud. The numbers just don't add up. They haven't provided proof that there are enough fraudulent votes that it would put Biden over the top. And that's going to be the hard pill for the right to swallow. Now, I could be wrong about this. There could be evidence, ooh, excuse me. There could be evidence that we just don't know about yet. Maybe the Trump campaign or the Trump team or the RNC or somebody else, maybe there is evidence out there showing that hundreds or tens of thousands of votes were fraudulent and they caused the election to go in Biden's favor. If that's the case, that will be submitted in court. I highly doubt that that's going to happen. I think it's a long shot, but I'm not going to pretend like it's not possible. It is very possible. But at this moment right now, there is not enough evidence to prove that enough voter fraud occurred that it meant that the election was being stolen from Trump and given to Biden. And like I said, that's the hard reality, and that's where I'm pissing off a lot of conservatives. I'm pissing off a lot of people on the left for even acknowledging that there was voter fraud. When it comes to the investigations, do I think investigations need to happen? Hell yeah. Every single one of these instances needs to be investigated, regardless of whether there's enough voter fraud to swing the election in Biden's favor or not. Because if this isn't investigated and if people are not held accountable, then it'll start getting worse. In future elections, we might actually be having a serious conversation as to whether or not voter fraud swung the results of the election. So I'm not against investigating any of this. I think that the Trump team should be fighting as hard as they can to make sure that each and every one of these instances is looked into and is investigated by people who are actually invested in finding out the truth. So you're not going to hear me bash the investigations. They should happen. And honestly, I mean, a lot of liberals are whining about it. I mean, but realistically, it's because even if they know that voter fraud didn't win Biden the election, they still know that some stuff is going to get exposed. That's why they're whining about it. That's why the corporate media is trying to cover it up, is because they don't want this whole operation to be exposed. And when I say operations, I don't think that this is some huge conspiracy. I just think that certain people in certain areas were being shady. So if the liberals want to whine about it, they can, but at the same time, they spent the last 4 years pretending like Trump won the election because of Vladimir Putin. And that whole theory was far more ridiculous than what we're talking about right now. Because did Russia try to interfere? Yes, of course they did. But you won't find any evidence that they actually influenced enough people to swing the election. That's what they won't tell you. So if they can put us through that, if they can put us through all those investigations, if they can spend $30 million on Robert Mueller to fall short of proving that Trump colluded with Russians, then y'all can wait a few weeks for people to investigate the voter fraud allegations and see what's what and see what's going on. And hopefully when they find that some people were involved in this, they'll get held accountable. I don't know what the sentence is for that type of crime. That's up to the lawyers, that's up to the prosecutors. But nobody on either side should be whining about investigations taking place. So that's pretty much where I stand on that issue. Again, I could be wrong. It could turn out that there's evidence, again, that we haven't seen that Trump has that shows that the Democrats cheated and swung the election in Biden's favor. But keep in mind, if I'm getting this right, they're going to have to do that in 3 states. They're going to have to do that for Georgia. They're going to have to do that for Michigan. And they're going to have to do that for Pennsylvania. Because Trump had to have won all 3 of those states to get enough electoral votes to win the election. I don't think it's going to happen. Not in all 3 of those states. I think at the very most you might get 1 or 2, but he has to get all 3. But again, it'll still expose malfeasance, and that's also important. Hopefully, when the court does make its decision, and let's say I'm right, and the court say, you know what, maybe there was some voter fraud, but Biden still got enough votes to win these states. I'm hoping that we can, at that point, pivot to something else, to something more productive. Because if we stay stuck on the voter fraud stuff, it's going to prevent us from doing what we need to do to figure out why Trump lost. Because we won down ballot. And if Georgia turns out the way it needs to, we'll still hold on to the Senate. We gained ground in the House. We did very well in state legislatures. So we were doing some things right. But with Trump, some things were wrong. And yeah, Trump is going to have to own that. He won't own it, but he's not going to own it. But we have to own the fact that Trump also got in his way too. But we also have to see what we could have done better to hold on to the presidency. And we need to figure out where we're going next. Instead of just blaming outside circumstances, we need to follow our own motto and pull ourselves up by the bootstraps, take some personal responsibility. Because if Trump lost, we can't just say it's because of voter fraud and because of the media. We have to figure out what we did wrong that could have changed things if we had done something differently, so that when it comes around the next time, and even just in the midterm elections in 2022, we need to make sure that we gain grounds in Congress as well. So that's where I'm at. And that's kind of where my mindset is at right now, although I'm not writing as much about it because we're still in the thick of the battle. But I will be talking more about it, in the weeks to come. And after it's settled, regardless of which way this goes, I'm going to be in building mode. I'm going to be in reform mode. I'm going to be talking about Renaissance on the right. Renaissance in Black conservatism, Renaissance in the conservative movement. If the conservative movement is going to remain relevant, we've got to make some serious changes. We've got to have some serious, tough conversations, uncomfortable conversations. We have to be willing to reimagine the dogma that we've been fed for decades. We don't need to reimagine our values. We don't need to rethink our commitment to free markets, to lower taxes, to individual freedoms, to the Second Amendment, to the First Amendment, to the entire Constitution. We don't need to rethink that. But what we do need to rethink is how we sell those values to the rest of the populace. We need to rethink how we can rebrand our movement in a way that's going to make it attractive for people who are coming up, and even people who are around my age or older. The whole Republican Party is going to need a reimagining, and I think it's time for that to happen. So I'll be talking more about that, but thank you for watching. Again, be sure to share, subscribe, like, most importantly, subscribe. I need more subscribers, guys. I need you guys to share this so I can get more subscribers so we can kind of broaden the conversation. But until then, you have a wonderful rest of the day.